Hey everybody, welcome to Q&A video number 44. Make sure to keep asking questions, doesn't matter what they're about. They can be about anything. Just know I don't respond to review questions or let's play questions in these videos, but we'll respond to them in the comments. You can post your questions in the comments below, you can send them to me via PM, or you can put them in the appropriate section of the forums, or on my Steam group. There is a discussion topic available for that. The gameplay in the background is of Civilization 5, because I've just been playing it a lot recently, and figured, and why not? So, there you go. And the first question for today is from RevUp26. Do you think the tabletop or pen and paper RPG is dead because of video games or Wizards of the Coast buying D&D and screwing up everything? No, it's a variety of factors. The biggest of them being a lot of people who are into tabletops don't actually have the time to get together as a group and play these things. You can't meet up at someone's house or something like that anymore, just because you don't have time. You've got a job, you've got other responsibilities that you have. So one of the big factors there is just time. People don't have the time to actually get together and work things out. So that's kind of a big problem. It's still kind of a taboo thing to be into tabletop RPGs as well. I don't really know why, but it's just people don't really advertise it all that much. They don't go around saying, hey, I'm a fan of this sort of thing. And so it makes it kind of hard for people to really associate with one another and figure out, hey, can we get this group together and actually play this game? Another big factor is the rise of online tabletops, and what I mean by that is people playing it over something like Skype, maybe over a virtual tabletop. You don't necessarily need that, depending on the system, of course. But you're seeing a lot more of that lately because it's way more convenient, and people can actually get together at certain times and actually do this thing without having to expend a lot of resources or anything to actually be able to play the game. And I know from personal experience, it can be just as enjoyable as playing it in an actual tabletop setting. So that's another factor. But probably the biggest factor is there are a handful of pen and paper systems out there that people play a lot. And those are basically D&D 3rd edition or 3.5, Pathfinder, which is basically 3.5, only better, AD&D, 4th edition of D&D, Shadowrun, and to some degree World of Darkness. That's kind of it. And the simple reason for a lot of that is people just don't want to learn new systems, which is a real shame because there are a lot of really good systems out there. But a lot of people are just really hesitant to learn a new system if they've gotten really used to, say, AD&D. They don't really want to go on to 3rd edition or 4th edition because that is a very large leap between these versions to some degree. And going from, say, 3.5 to 4th edition, you have to change your mentality completely because, well, 4th edition is combat and almost nothing else unless you've got a really, really good DM. Whereas 3rd edition was a lot more free-form as far as the mentality went. Of course, that also meant it ended up being kind of unbalanced as hell and really all over the place. So stuff like that tends to happen a lot. So it's not so much that the pen and paper game is dead, it's that people just aren't willing to learn new systems. They're not willing to go beyond what they actually know. And that's kind of the crux of the matter. That and people just not having the time to actually play them anymore. So you can still find plenty of people playing pen and paper RPGs, and as long as they have the time for it, then it's still alive. But again, that's a pretty big problem right now. Next one's from Snuzzles. Hey DW, do you think a good or clever GM or Game Master can make any pen and paper RPG enjoyable despite balance issues, combat overfocus, and rule inconsistencies and overcomplexity? He also gave examples of those being, for the first one, Recon, for the second, D&D 4th edition, and for the last one, Palladium Fantasy. Certainly, a really good DM can overcome anything, really. And that's one of the really big things. If you don't have a good DM, you're probably not going to enjoy the game. And it doesn't matter what the system is. I mean, you could be playing 3rd edition, you could play AD&D, you could play 4th edition, you could play Shadowrun, you could play World of Darkness, any of the Unisystem games. Doesn't matter. You could play any system you want, and if you don't have a good GM, then you're probably not going to have a good experience, because the GM really drives the game. They're the one that comes up with the storyline. I mean, they might use something from a book or something like that. but the way they tell it, the way they interact with the players, that's going to determine how much enjoyment you're going to have. Because that GM will be able to look at something and say, okay, this is clearly broken. I need to do something to balance this out. And so they might create a house rule, or they might modify some stats or something like that to make it actually more balanced. Such like that. Whereas with a bad DM, they'll probably just look at it and be like, whatever, and let the players run free and do whatever they want. A good DM will not do that. They will kind of rein the players in and say, okay, you're being too ridiculous here. We need to go and do something else here. So, yes, a good GM can make any pen and paper game enjoyable, regardless of what it is. But a bad GM will ruin any pen and paper system, regardless of what it is. And the next one is from Anubis. Hey DW, do you believe storytelling can outweigh a good storyline and vice versa? It's possible. I don't usually see it, though. And it's kind of a weird situation. I mean, you've got stuff like, say, Memento, which, if you haven't seen that movie, I don't want to spoil it so much, but the storytelling is just very interesting, the way they've set it up. And the story itself is reasonably good, but it's outclassed by the storytelling, which is just so much more interesting, and the way they've set it up makes it a way more interesting movie than it actually should be as far as the plot goes. So it's stuff like that that happens occasionally, but typically a good storyline and good storytelling go hand in hand. You can't really have one without the other. But you can have a good storyline that's actually ruined by bad storytelling, and you can have good storytelling that takes a bad story or a mediocre story and makes it better. So it's kind of all over the place on that. And it really just depends on the individual writer and such like that. So it does happen, but typically they go hand in hand. Next one's from Dark X Assassin 255. Do you think people should stop making modern military shooters? Yes. And the simple reason for that is it's turned into the World War II of this console generation, so to speak. If you don't know about the massive influx of World War II games post Saving Private Ryan, then consider yourself lucky, because those were dark times. I mean, not all of those games were bad or anything, but we were just so oversaturated with them that we got so sick of World War II. For instance, imagine going through the Normandy landing over and over and over and over again in every World War II game ever. Or the Battle of Carrington, or something like that. Just constantly, the same exact thing, over and over and over again. And you people complain about something like Call of Duty being the same thing over and over again. At least they tried to do something different to some degree. But, yes, they need to stop with the MMS, because it's become the new World War II setting. And I wouldn't mind if they released one every so often, but it seems like that's all we're getting these days, and so they need to do something to really shake things up. I don't know, maybe a space-based FPS or something like that. I don't know. But yes, they need to do something about this MMS overload that we're having right now. And the next one is from Lord Chaos. What are your thoughts on the large amount of backlash and controversy behind Aliens Colonial Marines as well as pre-orders? This has been a recent issue. I'm curious as to what you thought of it. This is two questions in one, so to speak. There's the one about Aliens Colonial Marines, which I think is incredibly depressing. Gearbox, you used to be so good. You made my favorite Half-Life game, which was Opposing Force. And then you went and made Borderlands, and it's all been downhill from there. So, yeah. The backlash for Colonial Marines is pretty justified. I mean, they did pretty much lie to us, so it's certainly justified, although it is still very depressing. As far as pre-orders go, I don't usually pre-order anything, and that's because pretty much every time I've pre-ordered something, it's turned out to be a very disappointing release. Basically, the only exception I've had to that rule was Mass Effect 2, and Dragon Age 2 to some degree, even though that did have some disappointments here and there, but it wasn't anything that overshadowed anything else. I don't usually pre-order things because I don't feel like it's a good idea. I feel like I should look and see what people think about it before I actually get into it. Now, I'm not talking about stuff like GameSpot or IGN, because you can never actually understand what they're trying to say in their reviews. They're mostly just stories. But just getting a general idea of what fans will think and what new people to the franchise or something like that will think. I generally look at that sort of thing before I make a purchasing decision. And that's partly why I do these reviews and such, is because I want to give you guys my own perspective on things. So you can look at that and be like, should I get this? Should I not get this? I mean, that's up to you, of course, but that's partly why I do these things. And pre-orders kind of rendered that sort of thing almost irrelevant, because when you look at a pre-order, it's like, okay, I'm just going to get this game regardless of what anybody else says. Okay, that's fine, but you're doing that to get maybe an extra gun or something like that. So there's not a huge amount of incentive for a lot of pre-orders. I mean, you occasionally get ones that are like the BioShock Infinite pre-order on Steam, where if you get a certain amount of pre-orders for it, they give you a copy of XCOM Enemy Unknown for free. So that sort of thing is pretty nice, but ultimately, I think pre-orders kind of are a detriment. Now, they're not always a detriment, but they're kind of a detriment. And it especially depends on what you're trying to get. Especially if it's something like, say, Call of Duty or something, where if you're going to pre-order that, then I hope you know what you're getting into. So, yeah. Ultimately, I'm pretty much against pre-orders, but in some cases they're okay. And if you know that what's going to get released is probably not going to suck, then it should be okay. I still don't recommend it, though. So that was Q&A 44. Make sure you keep asking questions, and I will catch you guys in later videos.